Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask you about resources and the availability of officers for the front line. We've talked a bit about the huge impact on police numbers that obviously people in self-isolation and officers going off unwell with the virus will have. I was thinking, in terms of your special constables, I know that there has been a campaign by a lot of police chiefs nationally to get employers to release their special constables on paid leave so they can report for duty, including amongst my local police force. I was wondering sort of what proportion of your special constables have had their employers agree to voluntarily release them for duty. And perhaps if I could start with Chief Constable Forsyth, just going across my screen from left to right.
So I would have to get back to you with those specific figures. As I mentioned, we are utilising our special constabularies in limited basis at the moment because we want to hold them in strategic reserve. What we're seeing generally across the workforce at the moment is that our abstraction levels are running somewhere between 10 and 14%. And as I mentioned earlier on, with the cancellation of non-essential training and the reductions that we've seen in some of the overall demand that's created by a reduction in crime reporting, a reduction in call handling numbers, that means that we're able to utilise our resources to maintain business as usual at the moment across all of our areas of business. So for me, it's important that if we see a further spike in our abstraction rates and absence rates for whatever the reason, then we're in a position to have a strategic reserve that comes in and backfills that through volunteers and through the use of the special constabulary. But I don't know the exact numbers of the availability of that special constabulary at the moment. I'll have to come back to you with those numbers.
No, that's fine. And I was just wondering, it's been brought to my attention because I asked a question about this in Parliament the other week. I've had a number of special constables from across the country contact me and say, well, look, I'd love to be able to, volunteer full time with my force, but my employer isn't releasing me for duty. They're not willing to increase the amount of time I'm released for, and there is nothing in the law that can compel them to release me. So I suppose that's where my question's coming from, really. Have you had any resistance from people who want to volunteer but aren't able to because their employers won't let them? And would a tweak in the law or in government guidance be useful? Perhaps if I could go to Chief Constable Goodman.
Hi, thank you for the question. We have had some examples where employers have released people, but it's only been a few. I think it's 4 employers have released their special constables full-time supporters, and I'm really grateful to them. But I'm also really conscious as well that we've got an economy to keep running. So some employers, when we've approached them, have been reluctant because they want to keep their businesses running where possible. We have written to all of our special constables across the force to say, please have the conversation with your employer, and if they're interested, we'll carry on with that. But as I say, it's only a minor take-up rate at the moment. Having said that, our actual absence levels are dropping. They're down 5% from where they were at the start of the crisis, as we've got beyond the first 2 weeks of self-isolation. And all our trends are saying it's going to stay steady, if not decline a little further. So like colleagues are saying, we are thinking about what we're doing in terms of special reserves as we move forward. But we are okay with things at the moment, and we think we will be for the time being.
Good news, thank you. Chief Constable Robbins.
Like many forces, the attendance levels have got better over the last week. We had a number of individuals off self-isolating and in the vulnerable categories. We're now down at 8.3 of our workforce. 8.3% is unable to work at this moment in time. But of that, there's a significant number who are actually working agilely as well, who are still putting in the work, but not in the workplace, if that makes sense. In terms of special constables, there's 282 across West Yorkshire. 18 of them are working full-time under the Employee Assistance Programme, and 177 of them, of the others, are also in the process of asking their employers, can they come and work for the police full-time? There's another group who we've got to remember are actually key workers, whether they be working in the NHS or in other situations as well, who unfortunately we can't now use, but they're required elsewhere. So we're going through that process of getting as many special constables with the full warranted powers of police officers working alongside us. I'm grateful to those employers who've released them to date.
Thank you. Chief Constable Winwood.
Thank you.
Yes, likewise, we heard earlier the Federation say there was about a 13 or 14% abstraction rate. We've got about an 8% abstraction rate. That's both isolating and sick. So therefore, with the reduction in demand from things like nighttime economy and some of those other crimes, we're actually seeing an uplift in people that were turning out to deliver that engagement on our streets. So our capacity, fortunately, is good at the moment. I have the privilege of being the National Citizens in Policing Lead for NPCC. So that includes special constabulary, volunteers, etc. So I've been very privileged to be involved in some of that background work that you've talked about, and we are still doing that research. So in terms of employer-supported policing, there are 180 companies, some of them national companies, who are engaged in employer-supported policing, which offers their special constabulary members of staff 12 days a year to come out on patrol as a special constable. We've written to all of those companies asking them in this time of crisis whether they can expand on that amount. We have seen some companies where their staff can't work at the moment, and those staff are putting their uniforms on and coming out with us almost full time, which is great to see. We're gathering the data on what's called duty sheet, which keeps a record of all the special constabulary hours and duties. So we'll be able to collect that both nationally and locally and provide the committee with those figures shortly, because obviously extrapolating over a couple of weeks rather than individual days and shifts will give us a much better idea of what people were normally working before the crisis started and the subsequent weeks that followed that crisis and that request out for people to come and volunteer. And of course, as my colleagues have said, we're still at good capacity, so we might see more use of that capacity as things develop. We are looking at, in the background, the longer term opportunities to expand on the benefit of our special constabulary and volunteers in times of crisis, and how we might look longer term to change the legislation to support us in that.
Thank you. Just one follow-up question to you, Chief Constable Winwood, if I may, since you're the national lead. You mentioned sort of a long-term project at looking at the legislation. Do you think a tweak in the law might be helpful? Because it occurs to me that since we passed the coronavirus bill a few weeks ago, health and social care workers have to be released, volunteers have to be released by employers, but there seems to be a bit of a grey area over releasing policing resources. And I imagine a pandemic may not be the only situation that we might feasibly face in the future where the power to have those individuals automatically released to you might be useful.
Absolutely, and I think we want to maintain that very special element of volunteering in policing, and therefore a look at the legislation in times of crisis would absolutely be welcomed, as opposed to a broader change in the legislation in terms of that volunteering, because it is a very special relationship at the moment in terms of our policing model.
Thank you.
Thank you very